Բարև ձեզ հարգելի բարեկամներ, Սփյուռքի ձայնը հեռուստահանդեսը դարձյալ ձեզ հետ է։ Նյու Յորքի Սուրբ Վարդան Մայրտաճարի հրապարակը զարդարվեց արվեստի բացառիկ գործով։ Հանրահայտ արտիստ Michael Aram-ի քանդակով նվիրված հայոց ցեղասպանության 100-ամյակին։ Այժմ հրավիրում եմ ձեզ դիտելու մեր պատրաստած ակնարկը այդ մասին։
On the evening of October 6, a beautiful 10-foot tall bronze and polished steel sculpture titled Migrations was unveiled and blessed in a ceremony on a plaza of St. Vartan Armenian Cathedral in Manhattan. A tribute to the 100th anniversary of Armenian genocide, Migrations is a creation of an award-winning artist, Michael Aram, who is internationally admired as a designer of beautiful, distinctive objects for the home and whose artworks are sold in over 50 countries around the world. A memorial to the events of 1915, Migrations is a testimony of survival, strength, and resilience of Armenians as a nation. Polished stainless steel base of the sculpture is disfigured by an internal crack in the shape of historic Armenian regions lost during the genocide a century ago. Blossoming upward and outward from this void is a flock of bronze doves, who take flight from the base of the structure in a symbolic migration from the old world to the new. Each bird has been individually and uniquely crafted by the artist. In her opening remarks, the mistress of ceremony, Sandra Shahinian-Leitner, welcomed the large number of attendees, members of our community, dignitaries and clergy that had gathered at the outside courtyard of the cathedral, where the sculpture has been permanently installed. Following her remarks, took place a ceremony of blessing of the sculpture, led by Archbishop Haik Kocharian. He then addressed the attended guests.
This sculpture will stand as an enduring testimony to this conviction that our common humanity is shown not in a tragedy itself, but in a miraculous response to the tragedy. As we have seen time and time again, the spirit of compassion knows no human boundaries. Tonight, we ask God's blessing on all those who endured the mass tragedies of the past 100 years, those who fell victim to violence, as well as those who bravely bore witness to it. As we stand migrations and view our own reflections in its surface, let us show our loving concern for one another and our solidarity with all others who have suffered and who are still suffering today.
In his speech, Michael Aram spoke in deeply personal and emotional terms about the sculpture and what it meant to him as an artist and an Armenian.
Making the piece, there was certainly a lot of emotion that went into it. I was thinking about families who were separated, people who were lost, people who couldn't reconnect to their children, people who lost their parents, orphans who, lost even their identity and didn't know who they were. Starved children who looked inhuman, who looked like birds, sunken, shriveled. So the piece has been a sort of heavy one for me to create, but at the same time, I look around tonight, I look around at our community. My heart is full of emotion for who we are today and the incredible debt that we owe our ancestors who persevered against unimaginable odds, and did what they could for us.
The evening concluded with beautiful musical performance by tenor Haik Kocharian and master pianist Shahan Artsaruni. At the end of the event, we had an opportunity to speak with Michael Aram. Michael, congratulations. I can only imagine the variety of emotions you must be going through right now. Tell us, our audience, in a few words, how do you feel? What do you feel right now?
You know, I have to say there's something almost cathartic about telling our story of the journey of the genocide of the last 100 years, from where our ancestors started, where they lived, their homes, their lands turned upside down, just like the map in the sculpture, emptied of its inhabitants, the personalities of the birds, from freaked out to resolute to almost lifeless. The whole emotional journey for me creating the piece has been very intense. But at the same time, I was very keen while making the piece to make sure that there was a feeling of progression, to make sure that there was a feeling of looking forward, that there was really a sign of the symbol of the journey of the last 100 years and us here and now today as vibrant Armenians in our communities worldwide, the diasporan community who flew east and west and north and south and survived and flourished, the success of our communities wherever they are around the world, I think is also evident in this piece. It really has a sense for me of forward motion and strength, with the high polished stainless steel as the shape of the khachkar, which again, of course, is a symbol of strength in our faith, but also as a reflective surface, so we can see ourselves as proof, as living proof of our existence and the ultimate success in our ancestors' struggle to survive. And they did it for us, And I think we have an obligation also. We have an obligation to remember. We have an obligation to celebrate. We have an obligation to pay homage to the incredible sacrifices, and also to remember, the great atrocities, and hope that, by remembering such acts, that they never happen again. And I do hope that whoever looks at the piece, whether they're from, Armenian backgrounds or not, that they still look at it and get a sense of their own family journeys or their own personal journeys of overcoming obstacles and surviving.
Let's speak a little bit about symbolism behind the sculpture. There's a map that encompassed in it. Maybe you can tell our audience a little bit in details about the symbolism of it.
Well, originally I had the map of Armenia.
Yes.
Which was a beautiful shape for the crack. It looked beautiful, but it wasn't the right map. What we really had to do was talk about the history of Armenia and the shapes of the historic provinces, to trace the outlines of where Armenians lived, where their ancestral lands were, and to really understand the magnitude of the loss, to understand the magnitude of the crime, and to understand, as we trace those provinces, the scope of the devastation. So that symbol was incredibly important to me, but more so the idea of turning the map on its side. For me, it was a symbol of upheaval. It was a symbol of Armenia being emptied of its people, as it would be if it was turned upside down. And, the birds flying, whether they were flying to heaven, whether they're flying, to safety, or whether they're flying from joyful to sad, or dead to sainthood even. It's a multiple, it's a sense of liberation, it's a sense of journey, and it's also a very interesting symbol of transfiguration, I think, which is something that's very unique in our church. When we think of the doves that are released on Easter Sunday as a symbol of, the journey from heaven, from earth to heaven.
Such a beautiful tradition that
and also, we have the beautiful symbol of the crane also, as celebrated by Tumanyan in his poem, by Gomidas in the song Gurung, and the idea of the crane who, leaves and gives news of his home to the person living abroad, but also as the crane whose migration was unnatural, who could not return home, who looked down at the rocks and felt jealous that the rocks could stay and he could not return. And I think, the beauty is now 100 years later that we're able to come back to our homeland, that, our journey is almost coming full circle. And, thank goodness, we have a country, we're keenly aware of our identity, and we're looking to really, celebrate our Armenianness and connect to our Armenianness in a way that felt inaccessible before. I know when I grew up, my grandparents always said, don't ever go to Turkey, don't ever go to Istanbul. They were from Constantinople.
Today we can go.
And today we can go.
Fight for our monuments.
And we can fight for our monuments, we can fight for our identity, we can, talk about what happened in a more open way and also in a more comfortable way. I think now 100 years later, okay, maybe my grandparents weren't able to find words to talk about something that was so unspeakable.
How could they?
How could they, right? They were so traumatized. And even my parents, didn't know because they never were told, But now I think as third generations, we're able to really understand and ideally talk about it, whether it's through writing or in my case, whether it's through a visual art form, to be able to narrate their stories and
Share it with public.
and share it with the public. Yes, and here we are in New York City, on 2nd Avenue with tens of thousands of people passing it every day. And I hope that their curiosity is piqued and they want to know what it's about.
And my final question is perhaps a difficult one. In your speech, you spoke about your children one day coming and seeing this sculpture. Just like you spoke about your grandparents. What would you like for them to feel many years from now when they come and stand in front of this beautiful work? What would you like them to feel?
I want them to get a sense of the journey that their ancestors took, the very difficult journey that their ancestors took so that they could be here today. And I think that there's a responsibility in that for them, to know that our life is so precious. People took, huge risks and undertook, great sacrifice for us to have the life. And I think that there's something very positive about that, very empowering about that, and very motivating about that. So, while I think as young children we, shouldn't be showing them pictures of crucified young girls and beheaded people and starving children, initially to talk about it in a way that's less violent, but that at the same time does tell the story of our journey and of the country in upheaval is a wonderful first step to introducing them to the story of the genocide.
Michael, thank you so much and congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Always a pleasure.